The morning light hadn't even broken through my kitchen window when I started preparing Ethan's lunch. My hands moved automatically through the familiar routine while my body screamed for sleep after another 12-hour shift at the hospital. Turkey sandwich on whole wheat, apple slices with a touch of lemon juice to keep them fresh, homemade oatmeal cookies, and a small bottle of orange juice. Nothing fancy, but made with love and care that only a mother could provide. I watched my 10-year-old son at the breakfast table, pushing cereal around his bowl with unusual lethargy. He'd been different lately, quieter, more withdrawn. The sparkle that usually danced in his brown eyes had dimmed to something I couldn't quite name. Every mother knows when something is wrong with her child, and my maternal instincts had been on high alert for weeks. "Sweetheart, you feeling okay?" I asked, placing his lunchbox next to his backpack. Ethan glanced up briefly, then back down at his cereal. "I'm fine, Mom." But he wasn't fine. I could see it in the way his shoulders hunched, how he avoided my gaze, the untouched lunches that came back home day after day. At first, I thought maybe he was trading with friends or didn't like what I packed. I tried different combinations, asked about his preferences, even slipped in special treats. Nothing changed. The pattern continued for weeks. Each morning, I'd pack his lunch with the same dedication, and each afternoon, I'd find most of it uneaten in his backpack. My worry grew like a cancer, eating away at me during my night shifts when I should have been focused on my patients. One afternoon, while waiting to pick up Ethan from school, another mother approached me. Sarah, whose son Jake was in Ethan's class, looked uncomfortable as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. "Rachel, I hope I'm not overstepping, but Jake mentioned that Ethan seems really sad lately. He said something about lunchtime being hard for him." My heart clenched. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, then touched my arm gently. "I don't know the details, but maybe you should talk to him." Jake seemed worried. That evening, I sat Ethan down in our small living room. The apartment wasn't much, but it was ours, a safe haven I'd created after his father left 3 years ago. I'd worked double shifts to keep this roof over our heads, to maintain stability in my son's life. "Baby, talk to me. What's happening at school?" Ethan's eyes filled with tears that he'd been holding back for who knows how long. "I'm a bad kid, Mom." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? No, sweetheart, you're not a bad kid. Why would you say that? Is it because of me that Dad left?" His voice cracked, and suddenly my little boy looked so fragile, so broken. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his small body shake with sobs. "No, baby, no. Dad leaving had nothing to do with you. You're perfect just the way you are." But even as I comforted him, I knew there was more to this story. Something was happening at school that was poisoning my child's self-worth, and I was going to find out what. The call came 3 days later while I was in the middle of administering medication to a patient. My phone vibrated insistently in my pocket, and when I saw the school's number, my stomach dropped. I excused myself and answered. "Miss Miller, this is Mr. Johnson from Riverside Elementary. I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been a serious incident involving Ethan." My hands shook as I informed my supervisor I had a family emergency. Nancy, my colleague and friend, immediately offered to cover my remaining patients. The 20-minute drive to school felt like hours, my mind racing through every terrible possibility. When I arrived, I was ushered into the principal's office where Mr. Johnson waited with Principal Martinez and Mrs. Carpenter, Ethan's teacher. Mrs. Carpenter sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of false concern that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Miss Miller, thank you for coming," Principal Martinez began, his face grave. "We've discovered something troubling that's been occurring in Mrs. Carpenter's classroom." Mr. Johnson, who taught the class next door, leaned forward. "I've been hearing things through the wall for weeks, but today I finally had cause to investigate. What I found was deeply disturbing." They turned a laptop toward me. "This is security footage from today's lunch period." My blood turned to ice as I watched the screen. There was my son's classroom, children seated at their desks with lunch boxes open. Mrs. Carpenter stood at the front, and in her hands was Ethan's lunchbox. My lunchbox, the one I'd packed with tired hands and endless love. "Class, I want to show you something." Mrs. Carpenter's voice came through the speakers, dripping with condescension. She held up Ethan's lunchbox like it was contaminated. "This is a perfect example of an inadequate lunch from a broken home. Look carefully, children. Cheap bread, processed meat, store-brand juice. This is what happens when parents fail to prioritize their children's nutrition." I watched in horror as she continued her cruel performance, dissecting each item I'd packed. The cookies are clearly homemade, which might seem caring, but really shows an inability to provide quality store-bought items. This type of meal reflects both financial inadequacy and poor parenting choices. The camera caught Ethan's face, red with humiliation, as his classmates laughed. Braden Thornton, a boy I recognized as coming from one of the wealthier families, pointed and declared loudly, "That's poor people food. My mom says people who eat like that end up stupid." But the worst was yet to come. Mrs. Carpenter walked to the trash can and, with deliberate slowness, dumped half of Ethan's lunch into it. Food like this isn't suitable for developing minds. Perhaps if Ethan's mother worked harder or made better life choices, she could provide appropriately for her child. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself, my nurse's training the only thing keeping me from completely losing control. When the video ended, silence filled the room like poisonous gas. I turned to Mrs. Carpenter, my voice deadly calm. "How long?" She blinked rapidly. "I don't understand what you mean. How long have you been humiliating my son? How long have you been using him as your personal example of what you consider failure?" Mr. Johnson spoke up. "From what I've gathered, this has been going on for at least 6 weeks. Other parents have come forward since I reported this incident. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of my baby suffering in silence, believing he was worthless, that he was the reason his father left, that his mother's love served in a sandwich wasn't good enough. 6 weeks of psychological torture disguised as education." I stood slowly, my body trembling with rage so pure it felt like electricity in my veins. "You call yourself an educator? You took a vulnerable child, a boy whose father abandoned him, whose mother works night shifts to keep a roof over his head, and you systematically destroyed his self-worth for your own sick satisfaction." Mrs. Carpenter's mask slipped. "I was simply providing real-world examples of how socioeconomic factors affect nutrition and academic performance. If you were more concerned about your son's well-being, perhaps you'd work normal hours and provide better for him." That was it. The final insult that shattered my composure. "Better? You want to talk about better? I am a registered nurse. I save lives while you destroy them. I work nights because it pays more, so I can afford that cheap whole wheat bread and processed turkey. Every item in that lunchbox was chosen with care, prepared with exhausted hands but a full heart. You wouldn't know love if it was served to you on a silver platter." Principal Martinez intervened. "Ms. Miller, please understand we're taking this very seriously. This behavior is completely unacceptable and will be addressed." Addressed? I laughed bitterly. "My son thinks he's worthless. He asks if he's the reason his father left. He won't eat because the woman he's supposed to trust made his mother's love something to be mocked. This goes beyond being addressed. This is abuse." I looked at each of them in turn. "I want a formal meeting with the Thornton family present. I want every parent whose child was in that room to know what happened. And I want guarantees that this woman will never harm another child again." The meeting with the Thorntons was scheduled for 2 days later. I spent those days gathering ammunition. Nancy helped me research, and what we found painted a disturbing picture. Mrs. Carpenter had a history of complaints that had been mysteriously dismissed. Always targeting children from single-parent homes, always those who received free or reduced lunch, always the ones whose parents worked unsuitable jobs. I also spent those 2 days holding my son as he finally released weeks of pain. He told me about the daily humiliations, how Mrs. Carpenter would compare lunches, praising the sushi and organic snacks while deriding anything she deemed inferior. How Braden Thornton had started a poor kid club where they would mock children like Ethan. How he'd stopped eating lunch altogether rather than face the shame. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not in my scrubs, but in my best professional outfit. I was done being dismissed as just another struggling single mother. I was a medical professional, a woman who'd rebuilt her life from ashes, and a mother who would burn the world down for her child. The Thorntons arrived in their Mercedes, Marcus Thornton in an expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. His wife Elizabeth glided in wearing designer clothes and an expression of practiced disdain. They looked at me like I was something unpleasant they'd stepped in. Principal Martinez opened the meeting, outlining the situation. Before he could finish, Marcus interrupted. "This is ridiculous. We're here because of a little teasing between children? Boys will be boys. If Ms. Miller's son is too sensitive to handle normal childhood interactions, perhaps she should consider homeschooling." I placed my phone on the table and hit record. "Mr. Thornton, I want to be very clear about what's happening here. Your son, encouraged by Mrs. Carpenter, has been leading systematic bullying against my child and others. This isn't teasing. It's targeted harassment. Elizabeth rolled her eyes. Oh please. Brayden told us all about Ethan's lunches. If you can't afford to feed your child properly, there are programs for that. No need to blame others for pointing out facts. Facts? I pulled out a folder Nancy had helped me prepare. Let's talk about facts. Fact, your son pushed mine off the playground equipment last Tuesday, resulting in bruised ribs. Fact, he's created a point system where kids get rewards for making my son cry. Fact, he told Ethan that welfare kids like him should eat from the garbage where their food belongs. Marcus's face shifted slightly. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. I produced statements from 6 other parents, photographs of Ethan's bruises, and screenshots from a group chat where Brayden bragged about his actions. Your son is 11 years old and already showing signs of serious behavioral issues. And instead of addressing it, you're enabling him. The meeting deteriorated from there. The Thorntons refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, threatening legal action if we continued to slander their son. Mrs. Carpenter sat silent, letting them fight her battle. When it became clear that the school was more interested in avoiding lawsuit than protecting children, I made a decision that would change everything. That night, Nancy came over after her shift. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I prepared Ethan's lunches, and created a plan. Nancy was brilliant with social media, something I'd never paid attention to before. Together, we crafted a post for the city's largest parenting forum. Are you sure about this? Nancy asked, her fingers hovering over the submit button. I thought about Ethan, about the other children suffering in silence, about every parent who worked themselves to exhaustion only to be told their love wasn't good enough. Do it. The post was titled When Teachers Become Bullies, a Riverside Elementary story. We didn't name names initially, but we described what happened, included a carefully edited clip from the security footage that showed Mrs. Carpenter's actions without revealing student faces, and asked if other parents had similar experiences. Within hours, the post exploded. Comments poured in from parents across the district sharing their own stories about Mrs. Carpenter. Former students, now adults, came forward with tales of humiliation that had stayed with them for decades. The local news picked it up by morning, and suddenly, Riverside Elementary was trending for all the wrong reasons. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted statements. Parents wanted meetings. The school board called an emergency session, but the call that shook me was from my supervisor at the hospital. Rachel, I need you to come in immediately. There's been a formal complaint filed against you. Marcus Thornton had made good on his threat. Using his legal connections, he'd filed a complaint with the hospital board claiming I was creating a hostile environment for his family and demanding my termination. The letter, delivered by courier, accused me of libel, harassment, and conduct unbecoming of a medical professional. I sat in my supervisor's office, feeling the walls close in. All I'd wanted was to protect my son, and now I might lose the job that kept us afloat. Rachel, my supervisor, drive. Patricia Williams said gently, I need to ask you formally, did you share patient information or use hospital resources in this situation? No, everything I did was as a mother, not a nurse. I used my own time, my own resources. She nodded. That's what I thought. However, Mr. Thornton is threatening to pull his company's substantial donations if we don't take action. My heart sank. I knew how these things worked. Money talked, and the Thorntons had plenty of it. I understand, I said quietly, already mentally calculating how long our savings would last. Drive. William studied me for a long moment. You know, Rachel, I have a granddaughter in 2nd grade. Different school, thank God, but still. She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture of a bright-eyed little girl. I can't imagine someone doing to her what was done to Ethan. She stood up. Decision made. You're one of our best nurses. Your patient satisfaction scores are consistently excellent. I'll need you to provide a written statement about the situation, but as far as I'm concerned, this is a personal matter that has no bearing on your professional performance. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. When I returned to the hospital floor, Nancy was waiting with a grim expression. Rachel, you need to see this. The Thorntons had escalated. They hired a PR firm to combat the negative publicity. Suddenly, stories appeared painting me as an unstable single mother jealous of successful families. They dug into my divorce, twisting the narrative to suggest I was bitter and taking it out on innocent people. They even found a photo from a staff party where I was holding a glass of wine and spun it into implications about my fitness as a parent. But they'd underestimated something crucial: the solidarity of nurses. Nancy started a group chat that night. Within hours, it had 50 members, all nurses from our hospital and others across the city. They'd all experienced the condescension, the assumptions that because they worked long hours or odd shifts, they were somehow lesser parents. The story of a nurse fighting for her child against entitled bullies struck a nerve. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. When I arrived for my shift, I found dozens of my colleagues gathered in the hospital lobby. They wore buttons Nancy had made overnight. Proud night shift parent and love doesn't have business hours. We're with you, Rachel, Nancy announced. They want to make this about class and profession? Fine, let's show them what nurses are made of. The movement spread beyond our hospital. Teachers who'd been silent spoke up about colleagues like Mrs. Carpenter. Parents in service industry shared their own experiences of discrimination. Hashtag Lunch of Dignity began trending, with thousands sharing photos of their simple, lovingly prepared meals. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following week. The Thorntons' PR campaign had backfired spectacularly. Instead of discrediting me, they created a rallying cry for every parent who'd ever been made to feel less than because they couldn't afford organic quinoa salads or didn't have time for Pinterest-worthy bento boxes. The night before the meeting, I tucked Ethan into bed. He'd been following everything with the strange resilience children possess. "Mom, are you scared?" he asked. I sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair. "A little, but you know what? Being scared doesn't mean we don't do what's right. Kids at school are talking about it. Some of them said their parents had problems with Mrs. Carpenter too." "Really?" He nodded. "Jake's mom is organizing something. She won't tell Jake what, but she said tomorrow is going to be important." The morning of the school board meeting, I understood what Jake's mother had been planning. The parking lot was packed, not just with cars but with people. Parents held signs: "Teachers should teach, not tear down, and every lunch made with love counts." Inside, the auditorium was standing room only. The 5 board members sat at their table, looking overwhelmed by the turnout. The Thorntons were there with their lawyer, Mrs. Carpenter with hers. The superintendent had come from the district office. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium on legs that felt surprisingly steady. I looked out at the sea of faces, many I recognized from the hospital, from school pickup, from the neighborhood. Working parents who loved their children fiercely but were made to feel it wasn't enough. My name is Rachel Miller. I'm a registered nurse, a single mother, and apparently, according to Mrs. Carpenter, a failure as a parent because I packed my son's lunch with store-brand juice. A murmur rippled through the crowd. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, my son was systematically humiliated in front of his peers. His lunch, prepared by hands that had just finished a 12-hour shift saving lives, was held up as an example of inadequacy. He was told that his mother's love, served between 2 slices of whole wheat bread, was inferior. I pulled out Ethan's lunchbox, the same one from the video. This isn't just about lunch. It's about a culture that says love only counts if it comes in expensive packaging. It's about educators who've forgotten that their job is to build children up, not tear them down based on their parents' tax brackets. One by one, other parents spoke. Mr. Chen, whose daughter had been mocked for bringing traditional Chinese food. Maria Santos, whose son was ridiculed for homemade tamales. David Cooper, a widowed father whose packaged lunches were deemed proof he didn't care about his daughter. The pattern was undeniable. Mrs. Carpenter had spent years using her classroom as a platform for her prejudices, protected by administrators who didn't want to rock the boat. But the most powerful testimony came from Mr. Johnson. "I've been teaching for 15 years, he said, his voice heavy with regret. "And for the last 3, I've listened through the walls as my colleague destroyed children's self-worth. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I was wrong. When educators see abuse and stay silent, we become complicit." He turned to look directly at me. "Ms. Miller, I apologize. To you and to Ethan and to every child I failed by not speaking up sooner." The board called for a recess. During the break, something unexpected happened. Elizabeth Thornton approached me in the hallway. Away from her husband and lawyers, she looked different. Tired, maybe even ashamed. "My mother was a seamstress," she said quietly, "worked 18-hour days so I could go to college. I used to be embarrassed by the lunches she packed. Simple things, poor things, I thought. She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I spent so many years trying to distance myself from that shame that I let my son become someone my mother would be horrified by. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared and steered her away, but something had shifted in her expression. When the meeting resumed, the board's decision was unanimous. Mrs. Carpenter was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. The district would implement mandatory bias training for all staff. A new anti-bullying program would be created with input from parents and mental health professionals. The Thorntons withdrew their legal threats, though Marcus left still muttering about the injustice of it all. Elizabeth said nothing, but she paused at the door and looked back at me with something that might have been an apology. 2 weeks later, the investigation concluded. 23 formal complaints were substantiated against Mrs. Carpenter, spanning 8 years. She was terminated and her teaching license was under review. The news reported it briefly, but the real victory wasn't in the headlines. The real victory was in Ethan's smile when he came home with an empty lunchbox. Mom, I traded half my sandwich for some of Jake's carrots. Is that okay? Of course, baby. That's what friends do. Nancy helped organize what became a monthly tradition at the hospital, the Night Shift Parents Support Group. We met on Saturday mornings, exhausted parents sharing coffee and stories, reminding each other that love doesn't follow a time clock. The Thorntons eventually moved Braden to a private school. I heard through the grapevine that Elizabeth had insisted on therapy for him. Sometimes, in my more generous moments, I hoped it would help. 6 months after that terrible day when I first saw the video, Riverside Elementary held its first cultural food fair. Families brought dishes representing their heritage, their circumstances, their love. Ethan and I made 3 dozen of our famous oatmeal cookies. As I watched him proudly explain to his classmates how we chose whole oats for fiber and added just a touch of cinnamon for warmth, I thought about how far we'd come. His shoulders were straight, his voice confident. The boy who'd asked if he was the reason his father left had found his worth again. Mrs. Chen approached with her daughter. Ms. Miller, I wanted to thank you. What you did, it mattered. We all did it together, I reminded her. No, she said firmly. You stood up first. When they tried to break you, you stood taller. That mattered. That night, as I prepared Ethan's lunch for the next day, he sat at the table doing homework. The kitchen was quiet except for the familiar sounds of sandwich making and the scratch of his pencil. Mom? He said suddenly, I'm glad you fought for me. I stopped spreading peanut butter and looked at my son. Baby, I will always fight for you. Always. I know, he said simply, then grinned. Plus, you're kind of famous now. Jake says his mom calls you the lunch lady warrior. I laughed, the sound filling our small kitchen with warmth. Well, I prefer Nurse Mom, but I'll take it. As I finished packing his lunch, adding an extra cookie just because I could, I thought about the journey we'd taken. From silence to speaking out, from shame to pride, from isolation to community. It hadn't been easy. There were still days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. But then I'd see Ethan heading off to school with his lunchbox held high, no longer ashamed of the love packed inside. I'd get messages from parents sharing their own victories, small moments of dignity reclaimed. I'd watch my colleagues at the hospital wearing their night shift parent buttons with pride. Mrs. Carpenter had tried to teach my son that his worth was measured by the price tag on his lunch. Instead, he learned that dignity can't be bought, that love doesn't come from a store, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with money or influence, but with the simple act of refusing to be silent. The lunchbox sits on our counter now, ready for tomorrow. It's the same one from that awful video, but it's been transformed. What was once a symbol of shame has become a badge of honor. Every morning, I pack it with the same care, the same love, the same determination that no one will ever make my child feel less than because of what's inside. Because that's what mothers do. We take our exhaustion, our worry, our fierce love, and we transform it into sandwiches and apple slices and homemade cookies. We pour our hearts into lunchboxes and send them out into the world, hoping they'll shield our children from cruelty. And when the world tries to tell us our love isn't good enough, we stand up, we speak out, we gather our tribes and we fight back. Not with expensive lawyers or PR firms, but with the unshakable power of parents who refuse to let their children be diminished. The alarm on my phone chimes softly. Time to get ready for my night shift. I kiss Ethan goodnight, grab my work bag, and head out into the evening. Tomorrow morning, I'll come home tired but fulfilled, and I'll make another lunch. Simple food, prepared with complex love, carrying all the dignity in the world.